Week 13 has no bye weeks whatsoever, but that doesn't mean you should be ignoring the waiver wire. Now is absolutely the time to solidify your roster for the playoffs, or just to make sure that you're not going to finish last in that all-important home league. I'm Tom Strachan. You know my written work from fantasypros.com. Today, we're going to get into the best waiver claims in week 13, along with some strength schedule details that you need to know about, and how I would prioritize the running back handcuffs that are out there. If you've got questions, drop them in the chat because we will answer 100% of them as we go tonight. And if you're watching this on replay, drop them down below anyway, and I promise you I'll get back to them by the time that the games kick off. Let's get into it, and let's start with one of the hottest names at the minute, Ameer Abdullah. And if you told me even a week ago, even 3 weeks ago, that Ameer Abdullah would be fantasy relevant, I'm not sure I would have believed you. Ameer Abdullah had faded pretty much to irrelevancy in the NFL, confined to a special teams only role behind Zamir White and Alexander Mattison, which isn't exactly, the toughest running back room to get past. But here we are. He played 90% of snaps in week 12, had 17.5 PPR points, which is as good as any Las Vegas running back has had all year. They play again on a slightly shorter week against the Chiefs this week on Friday, the Black Friday game. And it's going to be an uphill battle for both Alexander Mattison and Zamir White to make it. If one of them doesn't, I'm thinking that Abdullah can still be pretty relevant. And as Rich says in the chat, he looked good as a receiver. He did look good as a receiver. And I think the one thing that we know the Raiders are going to have to do a lot down the stretch is keep passing the ball, because they're going to keep getting put in negative game scripts. So Ameer Abdullah is probably one of the guys you want to prioritize this week if you need a win in week 13. Now, week 13, because there are no bye weeks, you might not find yourself needing one. So if you're looking for running back depth through the playoffs, then there's probably better guys, and we'll get into them as we go. Jeremy McNichols, another guy that could be useful if you need a win in week 13. Brian Robinson left the game, came back into the game, then left the game and was ruled out for the remainder of the game. So it's not like he was near to coming back in at that point. We haven't heard anything yet on him, but I think it's fair to assume it's going to be an uphill battle for him this week. And then Austin Eckler, you can almost certainly rule out after that nasty concussion at the end of the game. It's so rare for players to come back within a week with a concussion. So Jeremy McNichol, for me, is somebody who, if you need that win, go out and get him. But again, my guy Rich making sure pop. Chris Rodriguez, last time that Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler have been missing games, they've had no problem putting Chris Rodriguez out there. So I think Chris Rodriguez is somebody who's going to mix in a decent bit. If you're playing DFS contests, then Chris Rodriguez might be a slightly savvier player than Jerry McNichols. But Jerry McNichols is the guy who they've given a defined role to this year. They've used him consistently, and I think that we see him get the majority of the work this week. We'll get to the next play in a second. If this is your first time finding us here on Fantasy Sanctuary, hit the subscribe button. Dynasty, DFS, Redraft, Underdog Battle Royale content. We got it all year round. And my God, when we get to the offseason, that is when we really start cooking. Gus Edwards. Now, we can lump both the Chargers running backs in on this one. And I'm going to talk about both of them quite quickly because I don't think either of them are particularly desirable at the minute. But this is a run-first team at times. They haven't been that way as much since the bye week, but there are game scripts where Greg Roman can't help himself and he just reverts back to running the ball an awful lot. J.K. Dobbins left the game when he was looking really good and explosive last night, and it's a suspected MCL injury. It might only be a case of a week or two. He might be able to play through it, but it seems worth picking up Gus Edwards at this point. Look, Gus Edwards hasn't been amazing. He had 9 attempts for 11 yards last night, but in his first game back off the injury, he did have 10 for 55. The Ravens are a tough run defense. Even without Roquan Smith, that defensive line, it's hard to run on. And last night, the Chargers just couldn't do it. But I think that there are going to be games where you look at the Chargers and you look at J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards or even Kamani Vidal, depending on who's in there, and you want some exposure to them. Let's talk, though, about Kamani Vidal. It really comes down to what do you want to go for? Do you want some kind of safe floor to carry you through week 14? Because if you haven't looked ahead already, the week 14 buys are miserable. And if you just need somebody to pick you up 5, 6, 7 points, then Gus Edwards is probably fine. But if you want to shoot for upside, Kamani Vidal is probably the better bet. 21 touches for 93 yards and a touchdown so far. Obviously, that touchdown came on his very first play from scrimmage. And then when Gus Edwards returned off injury, off IR, it was straight back to the bench and, well, inactive, healthy scratch for Kamani Vidal, which kind of tells you where they're at on him. But Gus Edwards, like I said, he's not exactly lighting it up with consistency. Kamani Vidal is probably the more likely player to get in for passing game work. And if that happens, then we just know Justin Herbert is a good enough player that he can elevate people. J.K. Dobbins had 5 targets before leaving last night. So I really do think that Kamani Vidal has that pass catching upside in full PPR, where he might be worth a shot in deeper leagues. Now let's move on to the next player. Keon Coleman, 44% rostered on Yahoo leagues. Amari Cooper, it hasn't exactly been as strong a start for him in Buffalo as people thought it might be. He had the initial game where he wasn't playing very much, but got into the end zone. And since then, he's had 3 for 58, playing through injury issues of his own. Keon Coleman's missed a couple of games, but he was a top 16 wide receiver in both week 7 and 8 before his injury. The Bills, they very much have a legit shot at the AFC number 1 seed. They're going to keep on wanting to play hard, keep on wanting to put up good points and good performances. Josh Allen probably sneaky wants to be an MVP candidate. And I just think that we're going to see the Bills really round into form coming off a bye week. We talk year after year after year about seeing these bigger bumps and workloads for rookies after the bye week. Why not Keon Coleman? We've seen plenty of plays from him where we can trust him. Josh Allen clearly trusts him on those boundary throws, throwing to him over his shoulder. Really, very much a player that I would be looking to add right now, particularly with an eye on week 14 when the bye weeks are miserable. Come on, hit the subscribe button. 6 minutes in. I know you're going to. Noah Brown, look, the wide receiver position is pretty grim this week when it comes to the wide receivers that you might want to roster. But Noah Brown's consistently been somebody that I've been writing up in the game previews in our Discord and in our DFS content because he's just getting work. I mean, he's had above a 20% target share in 3 of the last 4 games, 29% target share versus Dallas, 10 targets. We know that Dallas are particularly weak against the right side of the field, which is where Noah Brown was lined up for the whole game practically. So there's a little bit of fugazi stuff there. But Noah Brown has solidified himself well ahead of the likes of Luke McCaffrey, well ahead of Olamide Zaccheaus, and even to a point where I would rather have Noah Brown than Zach Ertz if we were taking away the positional factor for it. He does have a week 14 bye, which isn't ideal, so don't go picking him up if you need immediate depth over the next 2 weeks. But once we get into the playoffs, the Commanders, they've got some fun matchups. They're kind of hovering around on the brink of the playoff places. They've lost 2 divisional games in a row, so we know they kind of need to put it together a little bit more. They play the Saints, the Eagles, and the Falcons over weeks 15, 16, 17. And I just think Noah Brown is somebody who's still getting underappreciated in fantasy right now. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 24% rostered on Yahoo. How did it come to this? I held off trying to stay away and not recommend him after the initial big game because it felt like such a classic rug pull situation. But then he goes out and has another good game on the back of it. Over his 2 games with Derek Carr, 5 catches, 196 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, that kind of efficiency isn't going to stick consistently, but the Saints have nobody else at wide receiver. You've got Taysom Hill, who's seen an increased role. You've got Alvin Kamara, who's still playing at a good level. And then you've got Derek Carr, who's been sneaky good at points this year and is playing well enough and playing for his job. They play the Commanders and then the Raiders in weeks 15 and 17. Neither of those teams are defenses that I'd be particularly worried about. If you find yourself in the playoffs and you've got an uphill battle, if you're taking on the number 1 seed and you're the 6th seed, MVS is the kind of player who's going to give you that ceiling outcome that you just might not have from somebody who's just picking up a few PPR points every week. Tyler says, MVS in the year of our Lord 2024. Imagine. Olave still only observing practice today. Yeah, I mean, counting on Olave, I'm not sure I can get there. Let's talk Devaugh and Vele, who's really kind of grown into a role over the last few weeks. He's been averaging 13.6 PPR points over his last 3 games. He's had a 23% target share in week 12, first game over 20%. We talk again and again about how much this offense just comes down to, does Sean Payton trust you? If Sean Payton trusts you and likes you, then you're going to be out there. Marvin Mims, it's never really happened. Like, he just seems to be the gadget guy. But Devaugh and Vele, who I believe is a 38-year-old rookie at this point or something close to that, has the trust. Perhaps that added maturity is just helping him. And in the playoffs, they play the Colts and the Bengals. The Bengals could absolutely have packed it up by then, and it won't even matter because they just stink on defense. So very much think that Devaugh and Vele is somebody that is worth rostering right now. They're past the bye week, so you don't need to worry about that. Bo Nix is absolutely starting to cook. He leads the league in 20-plus yard attempts. And the Broncos, sneaky good team, and I did not expect them. Jaylen Warren. I mean, we're going to dive in more into running backs in a few minutes, but I need to flag up Jaylen Warren. He's 59% rostered, so I know a few of you are going to be saying, oh, no, my league, I can't get Jaylen Warren. But Jaylen Warren's had 14.3 touches over the last 3 games, 75 yards on average in those 3. Second most explosive running back in the league last year behind Devaugh. Now, it hasn't looked as explosive this year, but he's been working his way back from an injury in the offseason. It was a hamstring injury, and then it kind of lingered. But as the season's going on, he seems to be getting better and better. He's averaged 4.6 yards per carry since week 8. We've seen Najee Harris start to get more and more banged up, leaving games at points. And Jaylen Warren, he's the perfect running back for Russ Wilson because Russ loves to check it down. Kiki, Vidal, and MVS were among my late round best ball picks. Big hopes for you, man. Because I think plenty of people ended up on the Vidal train. Less people ended up on MVS, but he could be an absolute monster if he helps you separate from people. Hunter Henry, we've not got too many more players before I dive into a little more playoff theory and then the running back handcuffs. But Hunter Henry, he's averaging 10.9 PPR points in games with Drake May. He's been a top 10 tight end across all that stretch. And the tight end position is such a mess. Why are we leaving Hunter Henry 48% rostered on Yahoo leagues, 20% target share over those games with Drake May, 7 targets per game, the week 14 bye? It's not ideal. We want to be finding guys that we can plug in and start for the rest of the way. But Hunter Henry, he is the only reliable piece of the Patriots offense right now. So I want to lean into him. They play the Cardinals, the Bills, and the Chargers in the playoffs. So obviously the Chargers in week 17, not ideal, but the Cardinals, definitely one which you can throw on. And then the Bills, divisional matches have a habit of getting quite weird. I think Hunter Henry is probably one of the easiest pickups you can make right now, just in case something happens, even if you've got a stud tight end at the top, to give yourself a little bit of a safety blanket. Hit the subscribe button. 12 minutes in. I know you're liking it. We're back with our weekly preview show on Friday this week. We've also got DFS content coming your way and much more, as well as Tyler's underdog streams and starts and sits streams on Sunday. So let's talk running back handcuff stashes. And these are kind of in order for me. Tyler Algier is absolutely the most valuable running back handcuff that is out there. I would be prioritizing him over almost anyone because if something happens to Bijan Robinson, you're going to get yourself a player who can play on all 3 downs. There's nobody else behind him, and the Falcons have a sneaky chance to win that division. Trey Benson, somebody you mentioned in last week's waivers video. Look, James Conner's never played more than 13 games in a season. He's been banged up a little bit more. We've seen more and more work go into Trey Benson in recent weeks. Very much worth picking up right now. Jordan Mason, the Niners season, I mean, it's teetering on the edge. I think, some people are already calling it done. How many games is CMC really going to play the rest of the way if the Niners are completely dumb? The only reason I don't rank Jordan Mason higher is that I think when the Niners season's done, it's going to be a lot of players going very quickly, and we're not going to see a huge amount from them. Armin saying Isaiah Pacheco will have workload determined in-game, a fantasy sentence nightmare. I think you can trust him simply because he's going to be far more explosive than Kareem Hunt, even coming off the injury. As Tyler points out, it's going to take 3 to 6 weeks for Pacheco to ramp up. Yeah, I get it. I'd probably be okay, though, playing Pacheco by about week 14, week 15. Obviously, less likely to play him this week, even though the Raiders is a really nice matchup. Zach Charbonnet's the next one, my RB4 in this list. We know that he can fill in well for Kenneth Walker. He did it earlier this year. He's been back on the bench since. And I think that Kenneth Walker has been running well, but Zach Charbonnet equally really good top tier backup. Emmanuel Wilson, Josh Jacobs had a huge workload this week. The coach speak coming out of the game was that they might need to lean on Emmanuel Wilson more this week. So if you're looking for a running back for immediate returns to help you whilst you try and figure things out, then Emmanuel Wilson probably has a sneaky upside this week. Devin Singletary, somebody I called a drop a couple of weeks ago. And then, you know what? Tyron Tracy keeps dropping the ball. So if Tyron Tracy is going to keep dropping the ball, then it is going to mean that Devin Singletary is going to find his way back onto the field a little more often. Jaylen Wright, clearly the running back 2 in Miami. And there's definitely a weighting to this where I'm giving a little more weighting to guys whose teams are playing for stuff. So obviously Devin Singletary probably isn't playing for a huge amount, but he's probably a better running back than Emmanuel Wilson. So kind of knocking him for that. Jaylen Wright, I put above Jerome Ford because Jerome Ford, Browns, they have nothing to play for. Cam Akers, I really like picking Cam Akers up in deep leagues right now because the Vikings, they seem to trust him well above Ty Chandler, which hurts me and Tyler deeply with our best ball bags. But yeah, Cam Akers has been used well. Aaron Jones seems to keep getting banged up, keep getting tired. Last week, he played a lot more snaps than in the previous couple of weeks, but Cam Akers has been mixing in when Aaron Jones is off the field. Ray Davis, again, you go back and look when James Cook was out, they were quite happy to put him out there, but the moment James Cook's there, he doesn't really have any value when James Cook's healthy. Blake Corum, I could understand if people wanted to push him higher than this, but Blake Corum absolutely just cannot get any touches. The team clearly don't trust him, and I don't really believe that the Rams would suddenly roll him out there for every snap like they do Kyron if something happened to Kyron. Good Josh in the chat, one of our YouTube members. You want to be like Josh, get access to Dynasty rankings, my rankings, weekly rankings, best ball rankings, loads of exclusive extra stuff and exclusive matchup content. Hit the join button down below. Where would Jonathan Brooks slot in as a handcuff? Honestly, I toyed with putting him on here and I just went, I'm not sure that Jonathan Brooks even has any value here because if you bring him back and then you're only going to give him a couple of snaps, he's clearly been healthy for a while. It's clearly just a decision they've made about how to use him. I think that they, again, wouldn't trust him to have a huge amount of work. So definitely a tricky one. And then Tajay Spears, he's banged up all the time. Otherwise, I would have him higher. Antonio Gibson, I don't think that the team particularly trusts him. We saw that when they benched Ramondre Stevenson. It didn't last very long for Antonio Gibson before they went back to Ramondre. Keaton Mitchell, the biggest dart throws, barely getting a touch as a running back. Let's get to Tristan's question. Would you trade Achane for Connor and McLaurin? Well, one of the problems here is that McLaurin has got his bye week coming up in week 14, so you kind of need to wait. Do you want, can you get by in week 14 without McLaurin? I think that's kind of, if you can get by, then it's probably fine. It feels like a fair deal. I mean, Achane is averaging like over 20 points a game in most games with Tua. He's been excellent. The receiving game's been excellent. Connor and McLaurin is probably, it's going to help you build out a better roster. But if you can find somebody who isn't on a week 14 bye instead of Terry McLaurin, I think I'd prefer to do that. Yeah, as Tyler says, trading away a top 3 running back for any reason is a bit difficult. I don't know if you were getting Achane there for McLaurin. It's got AJ Brown, Devaugh, and Waddle. That's the thing. Devaugh and Waddle are cooked, I feel like. Yeah, I definitely feel like Devaugh in particular is cooked, which again hurts me greatly. Waddle, there was enough kind of signs of life this week that I'd be okay putting a bit of faith in him. I think you just got to really be careful about the situation you place yourself into bye weeks at this point. Let's talk strength of schedule quickly. We did a video last week on the playoffs and preparing for him, strength of schedule. This works all by Scott Rainier, Munda Difflin, FF on Twitter. There's a link in the description to his Patreon where he does a huge amount of this work, and a huge amount of it is free as well. So I would highly recommend checking that out. J Dollar saying flex Rashad White, Dowdle, or Debo. Let me just get my fixtures up because only just getting through the matchups this week. Okay, so Devaugh, I mean, like I am a huge Devaugh fan, and I've gone on and on about this extensively. And I thought that he had the perfect run out this year, so I would really struggle to play Devaugh because the Bills they give up the 8th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They're a good pass defense. They're a good run defense. Rashad White against Carolina feels like an absolute smash matchup. I think that you could be very much looking at a game where Bucky Irving runs away with it. Maybe Sean Tucker gets more snaps, but Rashad White should see plenty of work there. Maybe if the Panthers can keep it spicy, then he gets a little more pass catching role in there. Dowdle, the Giants allow 5.4 yards per carry, so very much a team which you can run on. Obviously, the fact that it's going to be two terrible quarterbacks on either side keeps it in play. I think Rashad White's the better player here, but I'd be open to going Dowdle, and then you can always take that information from how you do on Thursday and make your other lineup decisions around that. I hope that helps. That's probably not the clearest answer, but it's quite close between Dowdle and Rashad White for me. Right. So just going into this fantasy playoff stuff, I think that there's a lot of stuff which people need to consider. So, you look at the top of the quarterbacks, most of the guys with easy schedule now are guys who aren't playing or aren't playing to a very high standard. Bryce Young kind of has quite a spicy set of games. I think that there's some potential there for him to keep going. Bo Nix, though, playing the Colts, the Chargers, and the Bengals is somebody I would prioritize if he's on your waivers. Otherwise, once we start getting about halfway down this list, there's a lot less players out there who are going to be seeing a lot of game time. Jameis Winston, the Chiefs, the Bengals, Miami is somebody I wouldn't mind. And then even Kirk Cousins, Raiders, Giants, Commanders feels fine. Let's see. Connor's question: trade Devonta Smith for Josh Jacobs? Yes, I would do that. I think Josh Jacobs, the way the Packers are playing, is so run heavy at the minute. So I'd be very much in on that. I'm not typically a Josh Jacobs fan, but he's running well. He's seeing more receiving work than ever before. And I think that would be a very smart trade to make if you can do it. Over on the running back side, Chuba Hubbard still leads the league in terms of best playoff schedule. Alexander Mattison right behind him, but I think that's why Ameer Abdullah is kind of worth a sneaky pickup, because if he earns a role, then he could be eaten into it. And you've got games against the Falcons, the Jags, and the Saints there. And then J.K. Dobbins, which is why singled out Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal as players that you should be picking up. After that, you're going to struggle to pick up some of those guys near the top. Travis Etienne's name there, though, about a third of the way down on the right-hand side, plays the Jets, the Raiders, and the Titans. Tank Bigsby, if he's out there, I don't hate picking him up. It's been pretty miserable since the early part of the season, but I do think he's okay. It's going to happen, Tyler. MVS going to score 25 points against the Saints in Week 17. Not against the Saints, Tyler. Not against the Saints. Against the Raiders. So let's cover some wide receiver and tight ends before we get out of here. DJ Moore, one of the easiest strength schedules the rest of the way. Malik Neighbors, but you're putting faith in Tommy DeVito, which is why if you're desperate, guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, kind of okay. Calvin Ridley listed as somebody with a really easy strength of schedule. Nick Westbrook-Akine, all he does is score touchdowns. I think he scored touchdowns on something ludicrous, like 20% of his targets or something daft, or it might even be higher than that. Cortland Sutton, you can see him towards the top of the list, which is why Devon Vele is in this video, because he has a nice run in. And then you've got guys like Xavier Legette, who you can go out and get off waivers right now. He's about 50% rostered. It's not going to be particularly comfortable, but that Bucks game in Week 17 is definitely one that I would be targeting. Chigokonkwo listed with the easiest tight end schedule for the rest of the way. He scored his first touchdown of the season. We know how fast he is. It just hasn't really clicked for him this year, but definitely somebody that's worth a speculative pickup if you find yourself in a really difficult situation. Theo Johnson, I don't know. I think there's a little too much working against him. But then you go down the list and it's just harder and harder to acquire these tight ends. Tyler Conklin, do we know who's going to be throwing him the ball? Maybe Tyrod Taylor will be better, but I'm not sure I'd want to bet on that one. Will Dissly's somebody who I do like. He's seeing consistent work, and I think that you can go out and acquire him in Dynasty for a 3rd round pick and just help solidify that position. Connor saying I have a deal of Devonta plus Warren for Henry and Jonnu. Possibly, would you rather that? Is that Hunter Henry or Derrick Henry? Because if it's Derrick Henry, then absolutely. I think that would be a very nice deal. I think you're getting pretty good offers for Devonta, so I would definitely be trying to take advantage of that whilst you can. Obviously, the Eagles play the Ravens this week, who have been pretty weak against wide receiver position, giving up the most fantasy points to the position, but they seem to be trending up over the last couple of weeks. So, Derrick Henry, yeah, I'd be completely happy to do that. I think that we're going to see plenty of volume out of Derrick Henry over the next couple of weeks. I think I probably prefer the Josh Jacobs deal because it's a little cleaner. But if you need the running back depth or if you need the tight end depth of Jonnu Smith, then I'd absolutely be fine with that. Mr. Magic sitting in second on a 5-game win streak with the hopes of Dobbins and Purdy ready for the playoffs, please. Yeah, man. I mean, Purdy's the one I'm particularly worried about there. It just feels like the Niners could shut it down very quickly and not risk it when they're about to go into an offseason where they're going to have to pay Brock Purdy. So very much iffy, as Tyler says, potential MCL sprain for Dobbins, but let's see how that one plays out. So, look, that's everything I've got time for. If you got more questions when the stream finishes, drop them in the comments below. I will answer 100% of them. If you want more content from Fantasy Sanctuary, hit the subscribe button. We'll be back later this week doing our Week 13 preview, talking all things DFS. Tyler will be here doing start sits on Sundays. Loads going on. Appreciate everybody for hanging out with us tonight, and we will be back very soon.